Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors. And you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability.
On this episode, Ken Bucke, forestry inspector in the environment section of the Department of Agriculture, chats to us about the environmental benefits and options of planting forests on the farm.
Why would you consider the native woodland planting scheme, and what's it all about? Have some forests been planted in the wrong place in the past, and if so, what's been done to improve environmental outcomes into the future?
I started off by asking Ken what is his role in the Forest Services.
Well, I suppose the Forest Service is a division of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and we're responsible for the regulation and promotion of forestry. So we implement the Forestry Act and we ensure compliance with the forestry aspects of other various pieces of legislation, for example, the Water Framework Directive, Habitats Directive, plant health regulations and that kind of thing. So in addition to that, we're also responsible for the various forestry schemes that you'll be familiar with. So within the Forest Service then, I'm an inspector in the environment section. I work mainly on water protection, both where forestry is a pressure, but I also work with the promotion of the use of woodland for water protection. So in both of those roles, I work on supporting colleagues who are assessing licenses and incidents, as well as working on the schemes and new procedures and that. I also do a lot of work with other agencies like yourselves, obviously, and working on the delivery of various aspects of the River Basin Management Plan for Ireland. So I work on the various regional operational committees, the Blue Dot programme and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Ken, I suppose over the last number of years now at this stage, we've been looking to, about carbon emissions and sequestration and water quality and biodiversity. I suppose forestry seem to be both a pressure and an ecosystem service. Can you tell me maybe what are the common water quality issues associated with forestry, and has the Forestry Service put mitigation, I suppose, in place to reduce the impact?
Yeah, well, I suppose maybe to answer that question, it's important maybe to give it a context. So to give forestry context, I should say. So if forestry is a significant land use, it covers about 11% of the land area in Ireland, and it's worth about 2.3 billion euros a year to the Irish economy and provides 12,000 jobs. So it's regulated under the Forestry Act of 2014 and SI 191 of 2017. And under that, there are a number of forestry operations that are regulated. So afforestation, thinning and felling and reforestation and forestry roadworks and to a lesser extent than aerial fertilization, but we don't really get many license applications for that anymore. So under that, there are about 3.5 million cubic meters of timber harvested every year through several thousand licenses that the department issues. We also get about 600 to 700 road license applications received every year. So it's important to say, I think, that where issues do arise, it's on the vast. It's a very small minority of sites, I think, considering the size and the number of operations being carried out. But I think it's also important to give a bit of history in terms of forestry in Ireland. So the state undertook really a program of afforestation after the creation of the foundation of the state, because I suppose at the turn of the last century, or 1900s, only about 1% of the country was covered in forest. So in the 1930s, the state embarked on a program of afforestation. And at the time, I suppose, right up through to the 80s, really, forestry was targeted on peat sites and upland peats and the kind of land that would have been not used for agriculture, really. So I suppose we were trying to get promote rural jobs in areas that maybe agricultural land was used for food production and the other land was used for everything else, I guess, was the objectives. So that carried on then up until, I suppose, through the 1980s. Then we saw, I suppose, the first of the private afforestation, really, and that kind of commenced with the Western Package. And again, that was on peats and 9 to the Western Seaboard counties again. And then really we started to introduce new regulations and guidelines in around setbacks and everything else. Only really started to come in the 1990s. So forestry, because it's long term, a lot of what we're dealing with these days are sites that were planted decades ago, and they're coming up for harvesting now on these upland peat sites. So now if we're planting a site, we will have new environmental requirements for afforestation. We have land types for afforestation, which keeps us out of these upland peats. So we would have anywhere on a mineral soil now, if we were planting, we would have a minimum 10-meter setback on mineral soils, and that would extend out to anywhere to 25 meters. And we have other tools like the native woodland scheme, to use for additional buffers and everything else. So really when we're regulating, or where these forestry operations become a pressure, quite often it's on these upland sites where we have issues with trees that are planted without setbacks, and there's issues with siltation that are rising, you know. So we have now, as well, it's important to say, up until 2017, we were working off the 1946 Forestry Act, which is quite old legislation, and it was quite black and white. It really was just where trees were felled, they have to be replanted. With the new Forestry Act that came in, it commenced in 2017, the 24 Act, it gives us a lot more flexibility when it comes to the licensing. And we also have a felling and reforestation policy, which was launched coincident with SI 191 of 2017. So now when these areas are felled, we have the opportunity to go back in and restructure these forests. So we can put in setbacks where there weren't setbacks before. We can change the species, and we can even remove areas from forestry, from permanent forest cover, if you like, for overriding environmental considerations. So, you know, Quilcha themselves have set up a new not-for-profit unit within Quilcha, which are looking at some of these areas, doing a lot of work on conversion to native woodland. So the department here actually, we can talk about it later, but actually grant aid the conversion of conifer forest to native woodland in these areas if it's to occur. So I suppose that there are two things. I suppose there are kind of two eras in kind of Irish forestry. There's these original plantings which happened in these upland peats, which we're left managing now, and there are also then, you know, the newer planting which is undertaken now on agricultural land in line with the environmental requirements for afforestation, the land types for afforestation, that kind of thing. The land types for afforestation, I suppose, just to mention it briefly, it was a piece of work that was done with your colleagues in Teagasc, led by Niall Farrelly, actually, and it's a plant-based scoring system for productivity, and it essentially takes us out of these blanket bog areas, you know.
That's a good news story, because I suppose in the priority areas for action, where say myself and Deirdre are working to improve water quality, yeah, that old forestry maybe 30, 40 years ago is planting those incorrect areas up on top of hills, maybe on bogs. Yeah, when they do get cut, you do see that sedimentation coming down, and so it's great to hear that mitigation's in place to avoid that going forward.
Yeah, like obviously it provides us an opportunity, you know, to restructure these areas when they come in for harvesting and for replanting. And like I said, there's grant aid there to help with the restructuring sometimes if native woodlands are planted. Something obviously we're working on with the Blue Dot program as well, and looking at these areas where we can try and identify areas for conversion to native woodland if it's appropriate, or even just quite often it's putting in the buffer which might be bolstered or, you know, strengthened with an area of native woodland planted on top with it as well. But obviously there are constraints, you know, with planting native woodland in terms of deer pressure and elevation and soil types and that kind of thing. So it's not always possible, but, you know, some areas would just be left unplanted or with bigger setbacks and that kind of thing. But, you know, with the licensing process as well, it's become much more robust, and, you know, we have a lot of measures and tools that we can use in terms of, you know, applying mitigation for harvesting operations and everything else as well, you know, in terms of silt fences and leaky dams and that kind of thing too. So working quite closely with the catchment scientists who are working on with LawPro and with yourselves, you know, we're kind of identifying more and more of these areas where, you know, better or more robust mitigation might be required. And it's great to have that link in with the likes of yourselves and with fisheries and the local authorities and everything else. And, you know, the connections we've developed through the regional operation committees and everything else, I think, are really important, because now we have this kind of team approach, collaborative approach, and everybody brings their expertise to the licensing process, which I think is really helpful, you know.
It's also good to know, I suppose, that, you know, these high nature sites and you know, are very important going forward, that the design and the siting and the soil type is taken into consideration in establishment.
Yes, it is. Like we, particularly with the land types for afforestation, is really takes any subjectivity or arguments out of the sites that could be planted. So we don't go near any sites now that would have heather on them, for example. It would have such a low score, it would pull any application out of it. So those kind of areas that were planted historically aren't being planted anymore, you know, and we're always adding new layers and new aspects into our GIS systems, like, you know, and we have lots of information that we've got from various actors, from you know, EPA, MPWS, and all these kind of things, and they are on our system for consideration licenses. You know.
Great. Farmers would probably want to know as well, going forward, are there any issues around woodland establishment around SACs or NHA sites?
Not necessarily prohibitive. So these all of our applications go through appropriate assessment in line with the Habitats Directive. So where they would interact with SACs or SPAs, which would be regulated by the Habitats Directive, they would usually get screened in for stage 2 appropriate assessment, and they would get an ecological assessment done. So it's not necessarily prohibited, but it would have to go through a very intensive environmental assessment. The one thing I would say is that at the moment there isn't any afforestation in hen harrier SPAs, and there hasn't been since about 2013. And that's kind of been parked until the outcome of the hen harrier threat response plan and that kind of thing. So for the moment, there's no afforestation hen harrier SPAs, but the rest of them we will consider on a case-by-case basis. But we do go through a stage 2 appropriate assessment, which is quite an intensive scrutiny of the applications.
The native woodland establishment scheme seems to be attractive to landowners who would like to plant forestry. Can you tell us a little bit about the scheme and some of the benefits, Ken, please?
Yeah, well, the native woodland scheme, under the afforestation schemes, we have a number of different grant and premium categories. So it goes, I think there are 12 categories, and the native woodland scheme is planted under categories 9 or 10. So under that scheme, we have 5 different scenario types for the woodland. So essentially, it looks at the site type, the soils, and everything else, and we would then try and identify the most appropriate native woodland type for the soil type, and the site and the elevation and everything else. So it goes through the normal processes of the application comes in. The landowners who work with a forester, the application comes into us, and we would assess it on its various merits, and on top of that, then the landowner gets a capital grant, which would cover all the costs for the planting. And then they get a premium payment every year of over €600 a year for 15 years. But the real benefits to native woodlands, to a lot of the work I would do, you'd be familiar with trying to promote it for the benefits for water quality. I think the benefits for biodiversity and carbon are probably fairly widely known. The trees can be quite good pollinators, actually, certain species, and everything else. But it's probably less widely known, that they're benefits for protection of water. So they have a real role to play, I think, in terms of the reduction in sediment mobilization and runoff into water courses on agricultural land in particular. The intercept nutrient runoff, particularly phosphorus, because through improved soil infiltration, and they do a lot of, obviously have a role in bank stabilization. They provide a lot of food and into aquatic ecosystems. They play a role in shading and cooling. Of fresh water, they have a real role in improving freshwater ecosystems, and there's a lot of research out there to back that up as well, especially in agricultural headwaters. They also have a really important role in the regulation of flood water through the slowing the flow, and their role as a natural water retention measure or a nature-based solution for floods. And they obviously do a lot in riparian restoration, obviously, as well. But we're always looking at reviewing these schemes and trying to improve the schemes and looking at ways we can try and promote their use and increase their uptake. We plant several hundred hectares of native woodland with various landowners every year, but recently we've added a few new schemes. We have the Woodland Creation on Public Land scheme, which is a native woodland creation, which is available to any state agency, local authorities, and state companies. They don't get the premium payment, but they get the capital grant. Whereas the landowners or farmers will get a premium payment every year for 15 years. And we also have a woodland environmental fund, which I think is really important for farmers, because the woodland environmental fund aims to attract in additional private funding. So under that scheme, where a private landowner or farmer creates a native woodland, they may be eligible to get a €1,000 a hectare top-up upfront payment coming from private sector. So there may be additional funding available even over and above what the department, can offer. I should say as well, when a farmer plants native woodland, the land isn't gone from their use forever. We do offer 2 thinning grants as well to come in and thin out the trees at usually around year 12 to sort of 15, and then a secondary thin maybe a bit later on. So that works out about €750 a year, or €750 a hectare for the first thinning, and €500 I think it is for the second thinning. So it's just, the farmers can still manage and make use of these woodlands, that they're theirs. They're an asset to the farm. I think, and they shouldn't just think, I've planted it and now I've lost that land forever.
I think what farmers really like about that scheme, Ken, is you don't like sometimes you think when you're planting a forest, you think you have to, throw up like 5, 10 hectares to it, but you don't. You can start off with a minimal hectarage for that native woodland scheme, can't you?
Yeah, the minimum area is as small as 0.1 of a hectare, so it can be really, really tiny. Like, obviously the payments are um, relative to the size of the area that's paid. But yeah, you don't have to go in with big areas. You can plant small areas, certainly we would encourage areas that have been planted, like, small copses of woodland even will go a long way in terms of water protection, that quite a lot of the pressures and water quality can just arise from a single critical source area or from one single flow path across a field. So as long as the small copse of woodland is planted to intercept that overland flow, it can have real benefits for the water quality. You don't need to plant a big long strip of riparian woodland along the field. It can be targeted very specifically in certain areas. And like we have done work with other people, and other, in terms of things around protection of drinking water and that kind of thing, using the planting small areas of native woodland to protect drinking water sources, for example. So there are lots of roles for just something as simple as a small group of trees, that can be massively beneficial.
Has there been much uptake in the agroforestry scheme?
Yeah, well, the agroforestry scheme was introduced at the start of the last forestry program in 2015, and then it was revised and the payments were increased a little bit in the mid-term review. So just, I suppose, for those who don't know, agroforestry is the practice of growing trees while continuing agriculture on the same piece of land. Now, there are lots of different types of agroforestry. The one that the department promotes at the moment is a silvopastoral system, which promotes the growth of grass in amongst the trees. So landowners can still take cuts off them or graze sheep in amongst them and that kind of thing. And the real benefits there, even in terms of agroforestry, for water quality, because it improves soil infiltration massively. And I would encourage maybe some of the farmers to maybe even just Google the Pont Bren project in Wales, which is a farmer-led project in Wales, which saw huge benefits to planting trees on land. In terms of not just the benefit of the water quality, but also for their own livestock and animal welfare and everything else. So some of the studies there showed that animals can stay on the land for up to 17 weeks longer, and that obviously reduces, the slurry being produced and everything else as well, and then the risk of the root nutrient runoff and all that kind of thing is reduced. But at the moment we have, to answer your question, Deirdre, there are 16 agroforestry areas which have been approved and have been planted, and we've another 13 in the system. So it's not a huge amount, but it is a new thing, whereas the forestry schemes are the same. When they came out first, it took a bit of time to get a bit of traction, and quite often, you need kind of champions in areas and people to plant up and then plant a few trees into the neighbours and see, well, actually this is working quite well. And I know that quite a lot of the farmers who have planted are using their farms as demo sites. Teagasc have used a few people, to bring the evening farm walks to and that kind of thing. So I think it's slow. It's a bit of a slow burner, but I would love to see more people take it up, obviously, because I think the benefits are massive. Plus the farmers can carry on their agricultural activity in and amongst the trees. And as the trees get older as well, the trees can be thinned out. We want to keep and maintain the growth of the grass sward as well. It's not about the grass eventually dying away as the trees grow up and start to close canopy. So I think it's important that the trees are planted at a much lower density. They're planted at 400 trees per hectare, whereas say the native woodland scheme, we plant 3,300 trees per hectare. So it'll show you the reduction in trees. So it really is very agricultural focused scheme, and we want farmers to be able to carry on agricultural practice on it,
I can go back to the commercial side there. Anyone building a house at the moment will tell you that the price of timber has gone through the roof there in the last 6 months. But going back on the last maybe year, maybe a bit more, farmers having some issues trying to get felling licenses. Where are we now with that hold up? Are we on top of it now, or where are we?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge the backlog. It's been a tough time, I know, for landowners and for farmers. It's been tough for us as well, to be honest. In the department, it's been a real slog the last couple of years. But the initial backlog occurred following a review of our appropriate assessment procedures, really, which came as a result of certain Court of Justice of the European Union decisions and their application in the national courts. So it's been a massive undertaking the last couple of years, but I think a huge number of new staff have been recruited by the department, and a massive amount of resources have been put into place into the licensing and the inspections. And we're starting to see improvements now. So just before the interview here, I checked some of our figures. So I look back there, June was the highest month for the issuing of private felling licenses in over 5 years. So going back way before this issue even occurred, which that included 226 private felling licenses at an average rate of about 50 private felling licenses a week. So in total, the department was issuing an average of about 95 licenses in the 7 weeks to the end of June, which was an increase of 50% in the previous year. So I hope that we've turned a corner in terms of licensing, but also in terms of there are other initiatives also going on as well. Some people might be familiar with Project Woodland, which is going on at the moment, and I think that might bring about further improvements in licensing efficiency and output. But I think as well from my own perspective, I think our approach to licensing and everything and field assessments and everything else is really improved a lot over the last couple of years, and especially more recently with the new resources and everything we have. So I think in the long term, the sector will be in a much better place. But I do think it's important as well to acknowledge the sector, that the work that the forestry sector has done to, they've similarly to ourselves, they've had to put a lot of additional resources into their own various companies. Farmers and landowners as well have come on board, many of them supplying NASs with their applications and everything else. So I think everybody, from the farmer to the companies to the department here as well, has really put the shoulder to the wheel over the last couple of years, and I think it's important to acknowledge everyone that was involved in it, not just ourselves. I think but hopefully it's turned the corner. Hopefully.
No, look, it's clear. Like there's lots of great benefits and options for landowners in forestry at the moment. And Ken, thanks a million for the update, because it's a kind of a subject area we're not all full on the landowner side. It's not something we do on a day-to-day basis. So it's great to get the information. So thanks a million for your time.
Thank you, Ken.
No problem at all. Thanks, Cathal. Thanks, Deirdre.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Ken Bucke, Forestry Inspector in the Environment section of the Department of Agriculture, for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, signpost to farm sustainability.